morning. My name is Miss Tori. I am a Youth Services Clerk at Donald W. Reynolds Library. This tutorial video is the third in a 6-part series teaching players how to play 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Today, I will be teaching you about adventuring basics. One of the most common things you do as an adventurer is to go on an adventure. There are certain actions that you commonly have to perform while on an adventure, and today we will be walking through what those actions are and how they work in the game of D&D. First, we need to talk about role-playing. Role-playing is when you, a player, pretend to be a character. There are two types, descriptive role-playing and active role-playing. Descriptive role-playing is when you just describe your character's actions. Active role-playing is when you actually act as if you are the character. You talk and move as they would. D&D has a rhythm of play in most actions. Here's how it goes. The Dungeon Master describes the game environment. An adventurer narrates what their character wants to do in that environment. Then the Dungeon Master narrates results based on the choices they made and the actions they took. Now, before you go on an adventure, you have to get ready to go on an adventure. Or, between adventures, you also have actions you can take. These are the common downtime actions that you might perform before or between adventures. Crafting, which means you make a non-magical item. You could practice a profession, which means you can try and earn money using a side job. You can recuperate from debilitating illnesses, diseases, or poisons. You can attempt to research a subject. Or, one of the most important is you train. When you train, you have to find an instructor, and you can train to learn a new language or tool. It usually takes about 250 days and costs 250 gold to learn a new tool proficiency or a new language. Now it's time to actually get into the actions you take on an adventure. So during an adventure, here are common things you might do. You move, travel long distances, sneak or hide, eat and drink, rest, socialize, interact with objects, assist other characters, and deal with hazards. We're going to go through each of these and how it works in the game of D&D. First, let's talk about movement. Now, if you're trying something more complex, like doing a flip, you would usually have to roll for that. But more simple movements, the DM will not usually require you to roll any dice for. You are given a base speed, called your walking speed, on your character sheet. How fast you go is mostly derived from that for other actions you take. Now, here are some of the simple movements you could be performing. You could walk, dash, climb, swim, crawl, high jump, where you're trying to jump as high as you can, or long jump, where you're trying to perhaps jump over a crevice. And then, of course, there is difficult terrain, which would be like bushes or swampland, where it just takes you longer to move. So, climbing, swimming, crawling, and when you go through difficult terrain are half your base speed. Running is twice as fast, so twice your base speed. To high jump, the number of feet in the air that you reach is equal to 3 plus your strength modifier. And to long jump, the number of feet is equal to your strength score of how far you can jump across something. That's movement. Now let's talk about traveling long distances. One of the things to remember in the game of Dungeons & Dragons is that it takes place in a fantasy realm that does not have much technological advancements, at least if you are playing the base game. So in general, you're going to be walking everywhere you need to go, and it generally takes a long time to do so. So before you start traveling, there are certain things you need to decide. First, you have to decide marching order. Marching order is the order that the players are walking in. Are certain characters side by side? Who's in front? Who's in back? The Dungeon Master needs to know these things to determine who sees what as they come up with challenges that the adventurers might face on the road. Another thing that you need to decide is watch. Characters cannot be on watch while they are performing other actions, such as tracking, navigating, drawing a map, or foraging. So it's good to have at least 2 members of your party on watch, while the other individuals are doing other things like navigating the way or drawing a map of where you're going or trying to gather food as you go. The third thing you need to decide is pace. So normal speed of walking is 24 miles per 8-hour day. You can try and go faster than that, in which case you would get 30 miles per 8-hour day. There is a cost to that, however, in that you are unable to pay as much attention to your surrounding, so you are more likely, or your characters are less likely to notice threats. You could also choose to do a slower pace of only 18 miles per 8-hour day. When you choose to do this, you can be stealthy as you move, which means you have the possibility of sneaking up on other enemies you might run into. Now let's talk about stealth and stealth tactics. When players wish to perform an action of stealth, they inform the Dungeon Master and then roll a dexterity stealth check against the opponent's passive wisdom. If they are successful, the Dungeon Master decides the results. The player may get advantage, or the opponent may suffer the penalties of being surprised. Here are some things that you could do that would be considered stealthy and would usually require a dexterity stealth check. Attempt a surprise attack, conceal yourself, try and slip past enemy guards, try and sneak up on someone, and then try and ambush an enemy as your entire party. Now let's talk about eating and drinking. Characters who do not eat and drink the required amounts will suffer the effects of exhaustion until they eat or drink the required amounts. So your characters need to eat 1 pound of food per day and drink 1 gallon of water per day, or 2 gallons of water per day if the weather is particularly hot. Resting. One of the biggest things that is very useful during resting is actually is one way of being healed. So if you take a long rest, which means you take a minimum of 8 hours in which a character spends 6 hours sleeping and 2 hours on a non-strenuous activity, such as keeping watch, then that character gets all of their lost hit points back. It does not cure, however, if they have got some sort of poison or other debilitating injury or something extra. It just gets your hit points back. Now, sometimes you don't have enough time to do a long rest and you can only do a short rest. A short rest is a minimum of 1 hour of non-strenuous activity. And when you take a short rest, you get to roll a dice called your hit dice, and you roll that, and that determines how many points you get back of hit points. Socializing. Throughout the game, you are going to have to socialize. Whether you are trying to convince a guard that you need to slip past or talking to your fellow party members, you are expected to active role play these events. So you are expected to pretend to be your character, which of course makes the game much more enjoyable. Now, when you are only expected to role play the character you are playing, the Dungeon Master will role play any NPCs or any villains. If, when you're interacting with someone or just talking to them, trying to convince them of something, the Dungeon Master may require a dice roll to be rolled. They'll generally require that dice roll if there's any element of uncertainty regarding the outcome of an interaction. So let's have an example. An adventurer is trying to convince a guard to let the party pass. How that would usually happen is first the player acts out, role plays exactly what their adventurer says and does. Then they would roll their dice. And that is how they would determine how they succeed. Now we're talking about interacting with objects. So some interactions with objects only require you to narrate what you're doing. For example, my character opens the door. That doesn't require a dice roll. Other interactions will require you to roll dice. For example, your character is trying to disable a trap. Your chances of using an item to accomplish a task. So a lot of the time when you're interacting with objects, what you're trying to do is use them. You're interacting with tools, which means you're trying to use them to do something. You have a much higher chance of being able to succeed at a task if you are proficient with the tools or items you are using. And there are some things that you can't do unless you are proficient with the items that let you do them. For example, you can't pick locks unless you are proficient in lock picking. And you can't use a medicine kit unless you are proficient in using medicine. And of course, another thing you have to do is carry your stuff. You have to carry your bedroll, your rations, all of this. You can carry objects with a weight equal to your strength score times 15. And sometimes you've also got to push, drag, or lift objects. For example, you might have to lift one of your party members and carry them. The amount you can lift is your strength score times 30. Assisting other characters. So there are some circumstances in which you can assist other characters. And when you do, you actually get to help your party members dice roll. So to help another player, you both have to be able to perform the task if it's something that two people can perform at once. And then the assistance you are providing has to make logical sense. You can't be attempting to do something that only one person can do at once. Your help actually has to be helpful as if it would be helpful in the real world. So how it works is the character with the highest applicable modifier should lead the effort. In other words, they should be the one choosing to do the task with everybody else helping them. Therefore, they will be the one who rolls the dice and they will get any modifiers. Or usually what will happen is that the dungeon master will give them advantage, which means they'll get to roll 2 d20s and take the higher result. Another thing that might happen if if the entire group wants to try and help with doing something, is that the dungeon master may have them perform a group check, which means everybody rolls and then you succeed if at least half the group succeed. If at least half the group's dice rolls actually equal whatever target number you're trying to reach. Finally, we have common hazards. There is, of course, combat, which we will be talking about next. We will be talking about in part 5 of our videos. But some other common hazards you will face is obscured vision. So lightly obscured is when the light is dim. And if it's a dim light, you can't see it as well. So the reflection of that is that you have disadvantage on wisdom or wisdom perception checks. And then there is heavily obscured vision, darkness. And that means that you can't see at all. And obviously that means that you probably will get snuck up on unless you're using another sense to detect opponents. Another common hazard is falling. For example, slipping on a trail and falling off a cliff. When you fall, you get 1d6 bludgeoning damage per 10 feet you fall. So in other words, every 10 feet you fall, you roll a d6, and that is how much damage you take until you get a max of either 20d6 or you actually hit the ground. Another hazard is suffocating. So you might have to hold your breath because you're in a forest full of poisonous spores, or you might be going across a lake and you've fallen off the boat in your armor and you can't swim in your armor, so you're drowning. You can hold your breath for the number of minutes equal to 1 plus your constitution modifier. After that, you start choking. And you last for the number of rounds equal to your constitution modifier. After that point, your character's dead, and you're probably going to have to be resurrected by the rest of your party. Another common hazard is being ambushed while you're traveling. So when you are ambushed, if you did not notice the attack, you are surprised. And when you are surprised, you can't move or take action during the first round of combat. So that means basically the opponents get 1 free attack on you before you get to fight back. And that is it for part 3 of How to Play Dungeons & Dragons. Part 4 will be a tutorial on dice rolls. Thank you for watching. If you are interested in accessing other programming provided by Baxter County Library, please visit our website, baxlib.org. Happy reading! See you next time.